In this video, we're going to start with a short refresher on threats and talk about what controls or mitigations are available and start introducing cryptography. In an earlier video, I talked about internal and external threats. Here, I'm going to focus on the external ones. Now, threats can be categorized into these four categories: interception, interruption, modification, and fabrication. The names are quite self-explanatory, as in interception is, for an example, an illicit copying of programs or data files, may be wiretapping. Interruption might be a malicious destruction of either hardware or erasure of programs or data files, possibly a malfunctioning operating system. An example of modifications could be if someone changes a value in a database or changes a program so that it makes additional computations, like the banker example I described in an earlier video. And a fabrication example might be an intruder that adds records to an existing database or inserts a transaction to a network communication. To counter these threats, there are numerous controls or mitigations available. The one we're going to talk about is encryption specifically, or scrambling of the data. But there are also software controls, access limitations, virus scanners, intrusion detections, hardware controls like firewalls. They actually exist as software solutions as well. There are also just policies and procedures like training the users how to use the system and enforcing some protocols. Some of the easiest and most effective and least expensive controls are physical controls, like just having locks on your doors, guards and entry points, taking backup copies of everything, and so on. But we're going to focus on encryption, which is the formal name for scrambling process. In its simplest explanation, it takes plain text data and transforms it into something called ciphertext that can't be read by an outsider, or at least can't be understood by an outsider. It can be used both for confidentiality concerns and integrity concerns. The method of encrypting is also referred to as hashing. It's used in the authentication process and the encryption process. For authentication, it's used to scramble the passwords before they are saved. There are some things that we need to keep in mind when we're storing hash passwords. The default state of hash functions is deterministic. So that's to say that they will produce the same hash value for identical passwords. The other thing to keep in mind is that users will convenience themselves as much as they possibly can by using the same password for many different things, and there is such a thing as commonly used passwords because they are simple and easy to remember. When you're using hashing for encryption, it's tempting to use passwords as the key for the encryption, but it's generally not recommended. Instead, you should use the passwords to generate the key. But we'll go on into encryption and passkeys in later videos. Now, regardless of the security purpose of the hashing, you should always aim to use approved cryptographic hash functions. As you, I assume, remember, cryptographic hash functions are considered practically impossible to invert. That is, you need more computing power than is available to get the original data from the hash. And they are quite good at providing assurance about integrity. You can tune them, and you actually should. For example, they often accept iteration counts. Simplistically, that is just telling the hash function to slow down. More technically, it determines how many times the pseudo-random function iterates to generate one block of master key. The iteration count should be selected as large as possible, as long as it doesn't slow down legitimate users of the system. But you have to strike a balance between having a system that that's actually responsive and slowing down hackers, because too slow makes your system also vulnerable against DDoS attacks. If attackers are trying multiple password combinations, they might need million attempts to find one successful combination. And if each attempt takes a second longer than then it will take them million seconds longer to find that successful combination. So any kind of slowing down is beneficial for you, not for them. There are a number of ways to try to hack passwords. One way is just by brute force, which is not really feasible unless you've only required a fixed size pin for your users and not a slow hash function. Dictionary attacks are quite common today and unfortunately very effective because people, as I said before, tend to choose something that's familiar to them or something that they can remember really easily. So they try to convenience themselves as much as possible. And as you see in the table there, with the 10 most popular passwords in 2019, the count there is how many times they've been seen in data breaches. And you see that password is still number 4 on the list in the year 2019, which is unbelievable. And also, common substitutions won't even slow the attackers down. Substituting S with a $sign, for example, because there are two common substitutions and two obvious substitutions to actually fool anybody. And even with people using techniques such as phrases or combinations of words instead of a single word, hackers have started to mine sources like the Bible, YouTube, and other sources for phrases. So passwords and security questions will always be a vulnerability in software systems. And there's just so much you can enforce before you start to inconvenience your users and possibly lose them. So we must find other ways to secure that vulnerability. One such way is salting. That is adding a salt or a randomly generated string to the passwords before hashing them. And it shouldn't be reused for every user. It should be randomly generated per user to be the most secure. It doesn't make cracking a single password any harder. It should be hard enough as is, but it makes cracking a list of passwords harder. Because the attacker can't find commonly used passwords by comparing identical hashes, because there shouldn't be any identical hashes, even though there are identical passwords, like you see in that example there in the table.